as Stefan said, I'm the director of the Centre for Sustainable Design. I started activity around sustainability in the late 80s, and I was involved in setting up an early stage consultancy looking at a range of issues. I did one of the first surveys around student attitudes, so I did an attitude called Students Fewer and Greener, about changing attitudes in young people. And then a bright idea I had in the early 90s was that there was no specialist publisher in particularly business and sustainability aspects. So I set up as a co-founder of a company called Greenleaf Publishing that still exists today. I also got involved in something called the Earth Centre, which was a major sustainability visitor attractor in the north of England, built in some communities on the base of some old coal mining areas. And then I got attached to what is now University for the Creative Arts, initially running a whole series of programs for SMEs. And a lot of our activity has been working, very closely with very small companies, although I have been involved with some big companies. So in 1995, I set up the Centre for Sustainable Design, which I am, still run after 20 years. One of those rare breeds that, again, knows the real challenges of putting funding in. So I've been pretty much from day one self-funding. A lot of challenges with bringing that in. We have to be very proactive and also be very European. Because we're part of what is a new university, we're not in the old structures and systems, so it's tougher for us to get money as well. So we participated in about 10 to 15 European projects over the years, and also have worked, in other places. And I guess the latter point is that I'm, apart from my sort of day job, University for Creative Arts is the second largest provider of graduates to the creative industry in Europe, from everything from fine art right through to architecture, product design, games design, etc. And the new Vice Chancellor, about 3 or 4 years ago, decided to set up a whole cross-university working group on sustainability, looking at estates issues, but also integration of issues into every course. So I'm now sort of chairing that group, and came hot foot from the meeting yesterday. So it's a pretty leading edge decision the leadership team have made there to integrate sustainability into every course they run. And that's not, so every course has a creative angle to it. We believe that's actually quite leading edge in the world. So anyway, that's a lot of my blah, 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 my background, and I'll now get into the presentation. So what I'm going to do is give a bit of a broad brush, a number of the issues I'm sure with this audience today you'll be familiar with, so I won't dwell on them too much, but I know we've built in time for questions, et cetera, et cetera. So then I will go into this area that we're thinking of around the democratization of industrial systems, and then I'll focus in on a couple of projects we're starting and running, and particularly one that has an Irish connection. We're working with some colleagues in Cork around transforming waste fishing nets into products to create jobs. So I'll leave you with that thought, and we'll come back to that. So we go back to 1987 to Grow Harlem Brundtland, the Brundtland Commission, and really sort of, building on some of the early conferences in environment and development in 1972. So we had the emergence in more common parlance of sustainable development. 1992, we had the Earth Summit, and I was fortunate enough to be there. But there was no conversation about climate change. There was no conversation about resource efficiency, and there was no conversation about innovation. So we think, sometimes that things have not moved on. But if we look at the context of time, things have moved on. Not as fast as we hope, slower than we hope, but things do move forward. Sometimes in the right direction, sometimes not. And what we've just had in September is 150 to 200 of the world's leaders now setting up the sustainable development goals, 17 goals to take sustainable development forward to 2030, taking over from the Millennium Goals. So I believe this is significant. I've also learnt in life a lot of things are about timing. So we have this in September, and obviously over the last sort of 10 to 15 years, we've seen climate change emerge, more as a emerging in the in the media, policy making, goals on climate change reduction. But perhaps it sort of dipped off after 2008 and the challenges that everybody faced after that. But again, coming up, towards the Paris summit, which we're just about to start, we've also had, and again, it's not probably for a lot of you here, new news that the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change, the world's top scientists came together to say, basically that climate change isn't just as a result of natural variations, it is as a result of human interaction. And as any of you saw, Prince Charles's presentation a couple of nights ago on Sky, followed by a very interesting little debate with a climate change denier from the US who runs the Weather Channel, which was, just Google it. It was a fascinating little thing, particularly when he introduced Prince Charles and the British Empire. It's, which century are you living in? So it was a very bizarre, but I imagine that guy is worth a lot of money. I imagine he is also has links with these, I think they're called the Koch brothers or so, Koch brothers, who are famously backing a lot of climate change denying activities. So we've got to remember that we have what I term these islands of anti that still exist and often have a lot of power. So anyway, top scientists, we have an issue. And as I mentioned, we're obviously now, moving, right centre forward into Paris and the COP climate change conference. And again, previously with Itchen, we were there in Copenhagen, X years ago now. Very badly organised. Didn't the Danes, who you normally assume to be quite efficient, couldn't organise a piss up in a brewery, came to mind. So it didn't really help the discussions and progression of things. But anyway, we're in Paris, and timing is important. We've had the Pope come out with statements around climate change. He was not there in 1992. We now have the Chinese and also and the Americans coming out with their own announcements around CO2 reduction. And the slide is missing here. But anyway, the other key thing I'm also seeing, so it's about timing. We've got the Sustainable Development Goals, we've got the Paris Climate Change Summit, so it's adding more fuel to the discussion and visibility that is coming back much more into the media at the moment. The other key thing is I'm seeing is that Obama, as he's moving out, of the presidency, is now coming out with a lot more statements around climate change. And he did the interview with David Attenborough, where he had this dialogue where he really, I'm a cynic, but I really thought he was trying to, get into an inquiry with David Attenborough to try and understand the issue. He wasn't talking to his advisors, he wasn't talking to the gurus, he was talking to a guy who's been working on these issues and doing the documentaries for many years. Again, from stuff that I picked up, I think it's often that Pester effect. His children were asking him. So I wouldn't be surprised, a la Clinton, he sets up a foundation around climate change in Africa. So I think it's, that he could be a key player into the future. You can never predict wrongly, but anyway, that's a prediction. So anyway, the other issue, bring it back into the conversation, is that what we had around about 2008, particularly in a European context, is a lot more discussions around resource productivity and resource efficiency. For many years, the Germans and the Japanese had focused a lot of activity about how they use their materials and resources much more efficiently. But we didn't have that so much, outside of particularly in Europe, the Northern European discussions. So we had a lot of concerns about, particularly what seemed to kick it off initially was a lot of concerns about access to critical metals that are used in ICT and electronics and low carbon technologies that are very small volume, but often quite critical to producing those technologies that are often mined from areas that have political instability. But then the discussion sort of broadened into this whole idea of how we much more efficiently use our resources and our materials so they're not leaking to landfill. Globally, we have a very, very efficient system that produces waste, the so-called take, make, waste economy, which is basically a linear system. So we take stuff from the ground, we make it, and we dispose it. So we got huge, challenges globally on this. So the idea emerged, much more strongly in policy and other dialogue of this need to move towards the so-called circular economy. And we've had various, thinkers over the last sort of 10 to 15 years, particularly note were a German chemist and an American architect, Braungart Madonna, who produced an initial book around 2002 called Cradle to Cradle. And basically they're talking about the idea of designing for the biological systems. So we design natural-based products, say yarn and stuff that goes into clothing, cotton or whatever, that is designed so that when they come to the end of their life, they decompose much more quickly. But it's designing that system, designing the system, intervening much earlier in the product development process. Design, or product development and design, at that stage of the product development process, you determine 80% of your product's environmental impact. If you're not thinking about environmental issues in the earlier stages of the product development and design process, you're locking in problems. And any of us, and I'll just jump around here, any of us who've tried to disassemble any form of product can see, and I was doing this last week, I think it was, taking a Morphy Richards toaster, we're trying to repair the toaster, and you've got these very specific special screws in there that's virtually impossible to open up. So we've got this issue of built-in product obsolescence. Again, I haven't got it in here, but because I've got a few more minutes, I've got freedom to elaborate a bit. So I call it the Voldemort of sustainability. For any of you who know Harry Potter, it's the issue that cannot be talked about. Manufacturers don't like to talk about it, but it is, particularly in low-priced products, many products have a built-in lifetime, and they are built, you can argue they're built to fail because they just want to sell another product. So anyway, this idea of the circular economy, designing for the biological system and then designing for the technical system. This is often to do with electronics and other what I term active products that use electricity in some form. So basically, we're looking at how you design systems to enable repair, refurbishment, right up to remanufacturing. And remanufacturing is a much bigger systems idea. It's almost a new business model. So thinking about remanufacturing, you have a lot of the photocopier companies now do this. They design in disassembly and upgradability into the product. So when it comes back in the first life, at the end of the first life of the product, goes into a section in the factory, they then look at it, they can design it so they can get into the product, so they can then repair and upgrade, and then they resell it. Now, there's two key elements to that. One, they use a leasing system, so they retain the linkage with the customer so that it comes back. If you sell the product, you can lose the link with the customer. So it's coming back. And particularly Xerox claim they get 7 lives out of those original photocopier platforms. You're now seeing a number of engine manufacturers, even Rolls-Royce are using this with their engines. And there's also Caterpillar, the earth-moving equipment guys, are also remanufacturing a lot of their engines. So anyway, so it's the idea of designing for the biological system and the technical system. We even now are, in a week or so's time, we are going to have the European Commission's first circular economy package being published, a suite of policy tools to stimulate. There's still some debate about precisely what's going to come out of that, but certainly from my information, there is likely to be more policy impact, particularly on the product issues. So we have something called the Eco-Design Directive that was originally there to try and integrate environmental considerations into product development and design. That's been primarily focused on the energy issue. So it's about how how it's been implemented at a national level is measures to reduce energy consumption in the use phase of the product. So it hasn't really looked at materials issues. But what we're seeing is working groups and activity within the Commission that is likely to produce new targets that companies, I'd say within the next 5 years, targets that companies will have to tackle to, for example, increase disassembly time. So it's certain specific targets to enable disassembly, repair, and a precursor or indicator to this sort of policy development may be from France. We saw in March the publishing, and France hasn't historically been, as most of us know, a greener country. But there's been activity going on behind the scenes in France for the last few years. Now this is quite, as far as I'm aware, quite significant. In March this year, the French passed a law that effectively meant that all white goods companies have to publish the lifetime of the product. So they actually have to say how long the product's lifetime is. And then basically what they then manufacturers will have to do is ensure there are spare parts there to enable people to repair the product. So it's the first, approach through legislation to try and, tackle some of these issues with built-in product obsolescence. And this is driving a lot of it, particularly in the consumer areas. It's consume, dump, move on to the next thing. And that's a real challenge, going back to the toaster issue. Cheaper to buy a new one than get it repaired in our systems. You go to, other parts of the world where it's an informal sector, these things, happen. But so it's an issue. And obviously, but maybe not obviously, again, post 2008, and there's a point for mentioning this, in the crash, we then saw United Nations, we saw OECD, World Economic Forum, publishing major reports on green growth and green economy. And how we interpret that, can be multifaceted, but we saw, for example, the Koreans pass the green growth law. We've seen the Danish and the Koreans also set up a global green growth initiative. And what you started to see is from those high-level policy documents, programs and job functions starting to emerge in various policymakers. So it's a trickle-down effect. Again, things happen, but they always move slower than we hope they are. Hope they will. So this idea of timing, climate change, the goals, the Paris summit, etc. Are we at a point of transformation or transition? Are we at a point of revolution, evolution? And there's a little minor thing that I realized when I did this slide. There's actually a very little difference between revolution and evolution. There's just that R. So the question is, what's the R? I don't know what the R is, but it's maybe a whole seminar is around. So are we at this point of revolution or evolution? And importantly, is that change going to come top down or bottom up? Certainly, we've always seen that sort of tripartite discussion about the need to involve business, government and civil society. But what I've seen to have seen over the last sort of 7 or so years is civil society seems to have got edited out of that discussion. Yet, a lot of the change I'm starting to see bubble up is driven by civil society. So I believe, potentially, from a couple of different directions, we're moving potentially into a new industrial renaissance, a new time for experimentation. And that's coming both out of necessity, but also as a result of various other changes. So on a high level, at a level of cities and companies, we've got this whole emergence of this discussion about Industry 4.0. You know, massively interconnected, more intelligent machines, cars talking to, buildings, transfer of data, more and more sensors in there to identify, air pollution changes, to try and remediate, look at areas to remediate those issues. So much more interconnection, smarter cities, smarter factories. And this idea of, more embeddedness of electronics and ICT. And you're seeing a lot of, particularly at the smart city level, a lot of major companies getting involved in this, and I think there's a lot of developments in Dublin here as an event about, a couple of years ago, and there was a guy, I think, from IBM talking, and there's like 100 PhDs working with IBM on this whole area in Dublin. But a lot of this, in my opinion, is a laboratory discussion. It's quite clean, it's very technologically driven. It's still very interesting and can generate a lot of potential benefit, but we're ignoring people in this. And so it's this idea of how we work towards, and it's in this building, livable systems. It's how we include the people. And I run an international conference now for 20 years on sustainable innovation. And we ran it last year in Denmark, and we had the chief architect for Copenhagen. And she was talking about how they're taking the city back to the people, in a sense, and organising even things like huge dinners in communities where people are bringing dinners just to get people talking to one another, regenerating, different parts. So yes, it's about technology and intelligence, but it's also about people and how we engage people, and maybe how we use the technology to crowdsource ideas. We've got a problem in this part of the city. How do we get people's ideas to focus in and generate the solutions? So cities can obviously, and I haven't got the statistic, I put the slide in there, but I think I can remember it. In the developed world by 2050, 86% of populations will be in cities. So urbanization is going to continue to grow in the developing world. I think it's 68% in the developing world. Obviously, cities can be huge, this came to my mind, wrong word, but anyway, furnaces of environmental problems. There can be a lot of challenges with air pollution, waste, etc. But also they can be potential catalysts, because what we have in cities is we have a lot of the networks very closely connected. So we've got entrepreneurs, we've got funders, we've got universities. But often we've got these systems are not well interlinked. So particularly what we've found in our work with SMEs around eco-innovation is it's very tough. Even if you're a two-person business, you've got a good idea for maybe an energy monitoring equipment or something, it's very difficult to find the funder, the missing piece, the knowledge, or even to find the people with the right commercial skills. So it's how we design better systems to bring these people together. And it's designing the systems. And again, what we can start to do, and is happening in some parts of the world, is to use the new techniques that are being enabled by information communication technologies, like crowdsourcing and crowdfunding. So crowdsourcing ideas around particular problems. And we're seeing a number of companies experimenting with this in the green space. Even hackathons and hacking sessions happening around particularly developing apps. And again, a number of these initiatives focused on developing apps to improve energy efficiency, resource productivity in cities, particularly in Singapore and San Francisco. So it's basically intense 24-hour, 48-hour sessions where people just get together to try and crack a problem. New in a collaborative manner, and that's again different to 10 years ago. It's people collaborating online and people coming together in spaces to start to, share their knowledge collectively to work on problems. And so cities have the potential to be catalysts for new sustainable solutions because of the proximity of people, those various networks, if we can connect people up effectively. So the counterpoint to this, which is probably touching on, the core of the event today, is something that I'm calling, and others may be calling it slightly different or slight variation, reindustrialization 1.0. And this is much more about decentralized approaches, potentially low carbon and circular, local consumption and production models. And it's coming from civil society. It's not coming from big government. It's not coming from big companies. So at the moment, this may be, growing activity, but at the margins. But it's growing, and I'll explain what I'm talking about. So what I believe is happening is we've got out of both necessity, and I'll explain that, and for a variety of reasons, a whole movement now to people wanting to start to make, modify and fix products. And again, it's different from 10 or so years ago. People starting to do things. And you're starting to see, at least in England at the moment, all sorts of baking programs, pottery programs, people getting back to using their hands to make stuff again. So this whole movement of making, modifying and fixing, often reutilising waste materials in the activities. Some of these are driven by necessity, post-2008, so it was an event chaired by a Canadian. He recounted, I brought this up. Son came to him in the US, in Canada, and said, I need, $1,000 to repair my car. He said, sorry, I haven't got that money anymore. You've got to fix it yourself. So as a necessity, necessity is the mother of invention. So people starting to have to be forced, some people have been forced to do it themselves. And so we've got this whole shift now emerging, even being picked up by Wired magazine, this emergence of so-called maker fairs. Even Obama hosted one in the White House, people making products, showing their products, etc., etc. And I believe this has been driven by increased access to information and YouTube videos on how to do stuff. If you really want to make or repair stuff, there is so much information on the web now, showing you visually how to do it, not in written form, but visually. We have the web. If you want to look at a disruptive innovation, Facebook is that, existed for 10 or so years, an eighth of the world population. So again, these solutions, these social networking solutions, are just enablers to an innate human desire to connect and share information. So it's enabling this collaboration. Again, new, wasn't there 12, 15 years ago, new. I always say, what is different? Well, that is different to 10 years ago. We also now have a number of organisations open sourcing their designs, so removing the patents from their designs. And we have even companies like Nike have done work on sustainable materials in relation to footwear products, removing the patents and sharing those to enable more innovation to happen. We've got the growing emergence of 3D printing. And we have the first series of 3D printers, and it's growing. You know, I have quite a long list now that I need to go through for a project I'm looking at. The first set of 3D printers that can use recycled plastics, can print using recycled plastics and biopolymers. And even we've seen, when we ran the event that Tommy was at, we had an example of something called Reading Hackerspace, who somebody brought in a baby stroller into the hackerspace. They identified the missing components from the product online, and then they printed the component and repaired the product. So it's a very nice interlinkage about the link between 3D printers potentially and repair. So it's not all about rubbish toys that nobody's going to use. There's actually some really interesting potential for this. And another key element to this is what I'm terming places and spaces to enable making, modification and fixing. So what we had in the early 2000s coming out of MIT is Fab Labs. This, and I just checked the figures lately, there's been quite a significant increase in these. The challenge so basically this is quite a specific sort of menu of requirements that you as an organisation or space have to fulfil to be given the status Fab Lab, but it includes, you know, provision of laser cutters, plasma cutters, 3D printers, etc. So this is quite a specific type of mechanism to enable people to make stuff, generally from digital images. So I haven't got the Ireland figure here, but I know there's 17 in the UK. Now, a more informal one, and perhaps a more interesting one, is makerspaces. 2,500 of these in the world. RDM Makerspace in the Netherlands. It sprung out of a Hochschule, a technical school in the Netherlands, which basically had all the technical equipment to make stuff that they'd use for the students, but what they decided to do was open it up to unemployed, to entrepreneurs and inventors to use the stuff. So then you rent time on the machine, or you'll buy a subscription to use the equipment. And this is a similar model being used in other places. So this again, is it a movement? Is it a shift? It's 2,500 have grown in about 10 years. And even now I just had a presentation from a Finnish university who's building a new campus, and they're almost building into their new building a makerspace. So they're trying to remove the wall between town and gown. So they've got the equipment that's going to be able to be used by students and by the community. So it's the university becoming more part of the community. So I thought that was quite an interesting, you know, removing the walls between the silos. Hackerspaces. So this isn't about hacking, you know, Apple's website. These are physical spaces generally, more informal, generally men closer to sort of men in sheds type of things, guys playing with electronics, essentially coming together to experiment, share information, and make electronics, make energy monitoring equipment. But we did, we believe it to be the first research in the world looking at what these hackerspaces were doing, and then also repair cafes that I'll come on to. So they weren't just making, they were also modifying products, and I'll come on to what I mean by that, but also fixing products, using a lot of waste materials. So there's, you know, getting on for 2,000 of these in the world now. And a couple of good examples that I've got of what I mean by product hacking is Dara O'Brien in his BBC Science Club. He showed how these guys in the hackerspaces are taking the webcam and for fun at the moment and for experimentation, changing that into a microscope. So they're taking the technical challenge of reconfiguring it. So a lot of what's going on is people taking on the technical challenge to experiment, but what we've seen is the first few examples of this leading to people coming up with product ideas and setting companies up. So it's that experimentation, is giving the new idea that may then stimulate, product development, companies and jobs. Repair cafes. Set up in 2010. I think there is an emerging set of repair cafes that are about to launch in Dublin or have launched. So we did the first survey in the world, certainly we know, of repair cafes. And our survey said, yes, so basically, if you don't know a repair cafe, you walk into a space, you've got a series of tables, I'm simplifying this, and on that table you've got an expert in electronics, an expert in mechanicals, bicycles, clothing and furniture. You simply take your product along and then people will work with you to fix the product. So the key thing is it is about getting your products repaired, but it's also a key thing is about giving something back to the community. We thought when we launched Fine and Repair Cafe, so we did the survey and then we thought, right, we're not going to stop there, we're going to launch a repair cafe ourselves. And we did this, actually following, I don't know where Tommy is up there, we did that after the conference. So we launched a repair cafe. And again, what we're finding in practice is there's a lot of people with skills out there that, if you create the right environment, are happy to share those skills. Early retirees, even an engineer will never stop being an engineer, we're learning. If you give them the opportunity, so we got some fantastic people with immense skills joining our repair cafe, and we've had about 9 sessions, about 450 people through the door. The very interesting statistic is of the 150 products we have, 70% have been repaired within the sessions. So, and therefore we've got, my colleague came up with a statistic, every 15 minutes we have a successful repair. And what we've learnt is particularly things like vacuum cleaners that are going to landfill or to community recycling. Once you get in there, a lot of the reason is just fluff and muck in there. If you get in there, you clean it up, and we've even used a repaired vacuum cleaner to suck the muck out of another vacuum cleaner. So this was quite a significant number. Getting the right skills there, there's a lot of stuff that is, as we all know, is going to if you've ever been to the community recycling things, there's so much stuff in there that has got more life in there, and we're proving this. And I think this could be, or repair cafes as they grow, and we've got 900 in about 5 years. So is that something marginal on is it on the margins, or is that starting to get towards a trend, that evolution revolution thing? So and what we've found is somebody who's been involved in around sustainability in various forms for now sort of 27 years, as we probably all of us know, it's often like pushing something up an isosceles and mountain. With this, we've had open doors. Everybody gets it. Everybody really, this is an open door on this, because also people are getting pissed off with products breaking down. So more energy to the Dublin Repair Cafe and wider in. And if anybody is interested, has any links into Cork and has any thoughts about setting one up in Cork, I'll come back to it in the end. Hopefully I'm okay for time here, Chair. Yeah. Okay. We've got a project that's starting in. We have partners in Cork. So basically, the key philosophy in this is that we have within our repair cafe is sharing in the repair. So you can't just dump your broken product. You have to share in the repair experience to transfer the knowledge.
We're also starting to see some emergence of some new types of organisations. We haven't quite been able to classify them yet, but they're sort of community businesses that are really triple bottom line sustainable. There's two. There's one called the Goldfinger Factory and one called the Remakery. Basically, they're setting themselves up in communities with a front end of a cafe to enable networking with the community, and then they're running repair sessions, making sessions, and then they're setting up incubators for entrepreneurs and craftspeople, particularly trying to stimulate them to create products from waste. So you really have got social, environmental and economic. And particularly this one is very interesting because this is two classically trained MBAs who've turned their back on big corporate to set this up, but they're bringing their business skills into doing something in a different way. And I think these are really interesting. Another quick thing we're starting to see emerging, bearing in mind this idea of the circular economy adding value, is a significant increase in upcycling. And there is no legal definition or standard definition of what upcycling is, but it's essentially adding value to a waste product or changing the function of an existing product. But Gumtree, that's a UK ad platform, have identified an 89% increase in ads for upcycled products over the last year. And what I mean by that is some examples here. So we've got Freitag bags. So this is essentially two Swiss brothers, industrial designers, seeing tarpaulins on lorries on the Autobahn, thinking, what happens to this great material when it comes to the end of life? It gets a bit ripped, straight to landfill. But what they thought is if we start to cut unique segments out of the logos, we could create unique designs. So essentially, they've got a highly successful business using waste products, adding creativity to a waste product. And they probably got their first year of material for free, which helped them get the business off the ground. So it's other examples here. This is Elvis and Cress making high-value bags out of old fire hoses, selling into Harrods. Essentially, creativity added to waste again. Is it art, is it product, but it's using old watch parts and clock parts, and this is now selling £50-75. So it's also the craft and art community. And this one, which is again, artist, designer, again, selling at a high value. This is old printed circuit boards. Creativity added to waste. What we've got also is new business models emerging around this whole area. So we've got Patagonia Outdoor Clothing Company have actually set up something called Common Threads. It's a platform with eBay trying to stimulate repair, and even have run ads, don't buy our product. So quite like making people think about buying the first life product. Could you repair the product first before you buy a new one? So this is quite interesting. That's pretty provocative. iFixit, very interesting US-based company, essentially using what I was talking about, the web-based approach. So they provide higher quality online tutorials about how to fix products. And then the business model is, so it enables you as a user to identify the problem, and then the business model is they then sell you the spares and the tools to fix the product yourself. So essentially they're educating people to solve the problem and then providing the tools to do it. And this is the first ICT platform for upcycled products that's launched about a year ago. Just in closing the last 5 minutes or so, I'll just go into a couple of projects we've just been involved in, or are in finishing and then just starting. So we've been engaged by Hampshire County Council, that's a big county in the UK, to work with 5 furniture reuse charities that basically take furniture out of the waste stream, do minor repairs and resell them to disadvantaged groups. So we've gone in and we've done innovation workshops, and then we've provided training on upskilling the volunteers and employees in terms of repair of furniture, electronics and clothing. And what I've found within these charities is it's been an eye-opener, really, for me. Tremendous amount of creativity, actually. 4 of the 5, lots of, because they're not faced with the conventional business model, they're there as a volunteer, and as long as the right culture is in place, you can stimulate this creativity. What I've seen is a lot of individual creativity of the volunteers. So they've been producing prototypes of upcycled bags and all sorts of things, but the challenge is they haven't captured it. So they haven't got a process to take the prototypes to products, and particularly for a lot of these charities that are increasingly under pressure for funding, it's an opportunity. And what we've seen also in the so this is not an example from one of them, but this is where they're moving to. This is an old piece of furniture, essentially then repairing it, but adding art to it. And most of what I've seen in these reuse charities is the bit they're missing is they're doing the repair, but they're not. I'm not sure if I like the phrase increasingly out of the box. They're not thinking out of the box. If we were to, make a link with a design college and get people to add some unique designs to this could add value to the product and again generate income to bring back in. We've seen one of the charities, one very interesting one called Ugly Duckling, who are starting. They even got an autistic kid who they recognised who really liked drawing cartoons, to start drawing cartoons on furniture, and they will then, so it's adding skills, it's adding value to products and reselling to bring income back in. So other elements of this is upskilling them in terms of repair. And I'll just finish off there with the Circular Ocean project. This is a project working with fishing communities in Norway, in Ireland, in Scotland and Greenland, essentially to tackle the problem of one aspect of the growing challenges around marine waste. So from figures I have, around about 8 million tonnes of plastic goes into the oceans every year, of which about 800,000 tonnes of that is fishing nets and ropes. So essentially, this project is about how we can convert that waste fishing nets, the nylon, the other types of polymers, into products within the communities to create jobs. And it will mean we're working with the fishermen, the harbours, the communities, to try and develop systems to do that, to collect it, to separate it, to pelletize it, to then create products out of this. And as I mentioned, our Irish partner is in Cork. So anybody has any connections in Cork that might be interested in that, please see me later. So this is the sort of thing we're dealing with. We may not see it, but then we've got this. And of course, this is generating, is killing, a lot of marine mammals. There is many growing initiatives around the world around trying to tackle this, but it's more about raising the awareness rather than, going to the next level in the sense that I'm talking about. So you've even got, from custom and practice, fishermen dumping nets directly in the sea. You've got direct landfilling. You've even got straight burning of nets, even in Europe. And so what we're going to be using is some of the knowledge we've generated through this booklet that we did, called Eco-Innovate, that we produced this about 2013 with our colleagues in Brussels. We thought this was a first cut. This was a very quick and dirty handbook to help eco-innovative SMEs on taking ideas to the market. 45,000 downloads. So there's growing interest from some places on this. So we're going to use our knowledge through this to work with the communities to try and design those systems that I was talking about. What we're seeing, and it really just now in closing here, is some really interesting. We're only a month into the project now, properly. There is a company in Italy called Aquafil who have developed this EcoNylon, that is they claim a higher quality nylon than First Life nylon, but it's been derived from fishing nets, and that is already being used in a variety of products. We also have even Pharrell Williams, the happy man, let's call him. He has also developed his own thing called something like BioYarn or something that's got it's a bit of a composite product that is using, I think, some form of organic yarn, but also the core of it is fibers from fishing nets. And he's putting this into products in the market. There's a Swedish company that is using polymers derived from fishing nets in all sorts of outdoor equipment. Skateboard, fishing nets. So there's quite an interesting backstory behind this as well. You could really develop a really interesting story behind a lot of these products. The first real example of this was perhaps 4 or 5 years ago. This is Interface Floor, who are one of the largest contract carpet companies in the world. Started a lot of their activities actually in the 90s. But they've basically been working with fishing communities in the Philippines to collect the nets and then clean, process, and produce products into carpets. And so they have a product called Networks that's a real product in the market. So I'm interested. We've got millions of ideas. How we move this into the market, how we generate jobs. Ideas are easy if we're half creative. It's making it happen. It's the tricky stuff. So these are all real examples in the market. So this is another, I think they have a link to Ireland with, is it BIM? BIM. Ports, yeah. So it's a Liverpool-based plastics recycler, and they're trying to create construction products from fishing nets. And so this particularly in Greenland is the partners, Technical University of Denmark, who are working into Greenland, are very interested in what's happening there because of the challenges with Greenland with housing, basically. So they want to sort of see how they really fishing nets into buildings and building materials. So I think hopefully I've given you at least sort of one thought out of this, and I'm not au fait enough with PowerPoint to add a big question mark on this. So anyway, thank you very much, and I hope you got at least one thing out of that.